Well, thank you so much. I am delighted to bring a great guest with me. Please, with your round of applause, welcome Senator Cory Booker, Democrat. Senator. And on our screen, we are delighted to have Deputy Prime Minister for the Restoration of Ukraine, Oleksandr Kubrakov, with us live from Kyiv. Welcome, Mr. Deputy Prime Minister. So we know, Deputy Prime Minister, you very much wanted to be here today to be with us in person, but the press of business has you working very hard right now in Kyiv. But we're so grateful for this conversation. And what I want to do is throw the first question to you. There are so many pressing infrastructure needs in Ukraine. Help our audience understand what your priorities are, what you need the most right now, and how can the transatlantic communities support you in that most pressing need? And welcome.
Thank you very much, dear colleagues, dear friends. Thank you for invitation and organization of Brussels Forum. I'm sincerely grateful to everyone who supports Ukraine. Ukrainians have the courage to resist. You saw it online on your broadcast, on TV channels, social networks during this 1 year plus already, almost half a year, several months. Again, we appreciate it, each support from each country. Since the first days of full-scale invasion from Russian Federation, we have faced challenges not seen in Europe since World War II. The first Russian strikes hit key transport junctions and railways substations just to hold traffic. More than 300 bridges on national roads, we're not touching even local roads, were destroyed or damaged. More than 8,000 kilometers of roads need major repairs. About 70 railway bridges were blown up by Russians' attacks during first weeks of the war. Our key task was to preserve and to restore transport infrastructure, roads, bridges, seaports, as quickly as possible. We tried to do this during first weeks of the war, after the occupation of first regions, Kyiv region, Bucha, Irpin, Chernigiv region, Kharkiv region. We were able to restore first like 130 artificial structures, mostly bridges, railway bridges, road bridges, during days, weeks, because it was critical for military supply, it was critical for humanitarian support, it was critical for our economy as well, because export issue is still very important, and it's important not only for Ukraine, because Ukraine is world's largest supplier of agricultural products, and in first months of large-scale invasion, the only route which was available for us was Danube, our seaports on Danube. After liberation of Zmyiny Island, we were able to open our channel to the Black Sea from Danube, and it's increased our export capacity, and we were able to export during last year through these channels, through our seaports on Danube, more than 16 million tons of cargo. It's mostly agricultural products. To this day, but again, it wasn't enough, because normal figures for our economy before the war, it's 150 million tons of different goods, and mostly it's agricultural products. Thanks again to all leaders, to all countries who supported Grain Initiative. It's United Nations, Turkey, European Union, and USA. So it was critical, and for this moment, we already exported through this channel about 30 million tons of agricultural products. Again, just to send to meet needs of the world. We hope that this support will be continue, and we will do this. We will continue to do this as well. Solidarity lanes, it was also critical project, in spite of all problems which we faced with our neighbors during last months, I would say. Currently, our ministry focuses on the projects which will return Ukrainians to home and stabilize situation in communities. One of the key focuses is energy infrastructure, and since first attacks on our energy system last year, we were focused on passive protection of our electricity substations. We covered more than 100 different objects. It's mostly electricity substations and generation stations with big bags, with different, very simple but cheap solutions. We were fast with this, and definitely it helped us. However, I will be honest, passive protection is not enough, and I have to say again to thank you, our partners, for the air defense equipment, which saved many lives of our people. At the session of the summit of G7 countries, President Volodymyr Zelensky said that patriots in the hands of Ukrainians showed what democracy is capable of. However, the air shield can be complete only when ground-based air defense systems are supplemented by modern aircraft in the air. And again, we are grateful for the just decisions which we received in the last several days. I think when our pilots trained on F-16 and when these machines appear in our sky, it will be important not only for Ukraine, because it will be a historic moment for the entire security architecture of the world. Again, if try to simplify, our Black Sea channels, our Black Sea waters can be protected by ourselves without any initiatives in case if we will receive F-16s, in case if we will receive enough air defense systems. So we don't need any initiatives. In this case, we can restart our economy because still a lot of industries, they're suffering with the problems of logistics. Again, if I may, just a few words, just in order to, okay, and finish here. Just the war faced us to look at protection, not only energy infrastructure objects. We already designing tunnels on important logistic routes, because we see that there were a lot of attempts to destroy the key bridges, the key tunnels, the key objects, and the president also signed a law according to which every house must have a bomb shelter. So we already taken this in our recovery plans and working on this. The need to rebuild offers an opportunity to invest in safe and resilient infrastructure. And today we already established important partnership. Our major recovery projects include, for example, cooperation with World Bank Group on housing, utility services, transport, JICA emergency recovery needs, the European Investment Bank on utility services, transport, European Bank of Reconstruction and Development on transport and energy, with UK on transport, with USA on emergency needs and energy, Switzerland transport. And again, I would like to mention more and more countries, because many of those projects with IFIs, they're backed by many countries and donors. I often hear the opinion that the current war is war of logistics. I think so, I agree. But more important, this is a war of economies. We need a strong, sustainable economy, and this is possible to achieve as a result if powerful investments come to our country. Our task now, even despite the war, is to create and improve conditions for necessary conditions for arrival of investors. The key principles of such changes are the rule of law, transparency, and the competitive environment for business. Every day we work on reforming our industry, opening the market for development. The effective implementation of economic reforms bring us closer to the key foreign policy goal of EU membership. Thank you to you, our partners, for cooperation and support. Together, we bring Ukraine closer to victory. Thank you.
Oh, Mr. Deputy Prime Minister, thank you very much. Senator, I have to say, hearing that a requirement of every house has to have a bomb shelter is something that is quite unimaginable, I think, to most of the American people. You're a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. You have visited Ukraine previously. How does this look from your vantage point, not only where we are in the war, but the imperative of reconstruction?
Well, first of all, let me say thank you to everyone at the GMF for having me here. This is extraordinary to sit not just with you and your leadership, but Deputy Prime Minister, what an honor to be virtually in your presence. I had the privilege of after the Russian invasion of Crimea and the attacks along the line of contact in the Donbass region around 2017, 2018, to be there with a lot of your military leadership in one of those bunkers, discussing the critical relationships between our countries and supporting you in the efforts then. It was a time that I found so much inspiration from the grit and the toughness of the Ukrainian people and people who were serving in the military. There is this profound leader in American history named Martin Luther King, who said in these letters from the Birmingham jail that we're all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a common garment of destiny, that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We're seeing this on the international context and everything from the global pandemic to the challenge of climate change. But the crisis in Ukraine, which directly affects the Ukrainian people, this unjust invasion, is showing so many of us that that crisis directly affecting Ukrainians is affecting us all indirectly, whether it's food security, the global economy, and more. And so from my perch in the Foreign Relations Committee, I'm proud that there is this bipartisan understanding that America is deeply invested in the security and the protection of Ukraine and the end to this unjust war and invasion. But even more than that, we know both from our history and as we look to the future that now is the time that we need to be talking about Ukrainian reconstruction and supporting Ukrainians in their self-determination as they go forward. Not just as the Deputy Prime Minister was talking about in terms of roads, bridges, and critical infrastructure, but also in the long-term security of Ukraine, everything from supporting it in its anti-corruption efforts, supporting it in its democratic reform, supporting it in its deeper ties to the European Union, supporting it in its energy independence. The making of a stronger Ukraine in the aftermath of the repelling of this invasion is critical, so that we could perhaps live in a day that no one in Europe, whether it be our Baltic countries or Finland, no one has to live in fear of a world where might makes right, but instead that there is an international world order that secures peace and prosperity.
Senator, I want to stick for you for a moment, and then I want to turn to the Deputy Prime Minister. I think the one question that I often get in Washington is, how long will the American people support this effort, the sense of fatigue, the cost of this, when so many of our citizens are also feeling the cost of living increases, inflation? What is your answer? What's your pitch when you go back to New Jersey and citizens ask you, and how can we help tell this story? Because I think in the United States and Europe as well, we have to share the importance of this story. In the Marshall Plan, they had to have a Marshall Plan to sell the Marshall Plan. George Marshall went everywhere to tell the American people why this was important to do 75 years ago. I think we need to do that again. What do you think?
Well, first of all, I want to say that I have not seen fatigue in my state. I still drive around New Jersey and see Ukrainian flags flying from American homes. I've stood in an auditorium of people bringing their resources to ship supplies, and Americans standing up and saying, I am Ukrainian, because they know, though we are different nations, we share a common purpose in the defense. So I'm not seeing that fatigue when it comes to driving the highways and byways of my state. Even as I travel the nation, I still see Ukrainian flags, Ukrainian lapel pins. But the beauty right now in the United States Senate is you still see strong, deep, bipartisan support. And that bipartisan support is really critical. Because as much as we want to talk about the Marshall Plan, Marshall, part of a Democratic administration, it was Arthur Vandenberg,
That's right,
as the head of the Foreign Relations Committee, the Republican, that made it possible. Someone who started out as an isolationist who came to understand that the reconstruction of Europe was critical to the economic success and the overall security concerns of the United States. And so we need to not look that far into our own common history, whether it's from Japan to Germany, whether it's the Berlin airlift or the formation of NATO, that this country is deeply invested in the security of our European allies and Ukraine. And even more than that, there is a crisis at our hands right now, but no one will forget that the Mandarin symbol of crisis is danger and opportunity. We have invested so much already in this war effort. I will continue to support, as I have before, the security and defense capabilities of Ukraine. But we must understand now that we cannot afford to win the war and lose the peace. We have got to be a nation that understands that this is going to be a long process. It will demand patience and investment, but there will be a return on our investment as a whole.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Senator. Deputy Prime Minister, I would love for you to share with our audience the fact that you are currently rebuilding, even in newly liberated territories. You're rebuilding homes, rebuilding that infrastructure. I think that would be a welcome story. And my second question is, it's not just restoring Ukraine, it's modernizing Ukraine, building a sustainable Ukraine. Can you help share your thoughts about how to modernize and have a sustainable recovery, particularly on infrastructure? Ukraine can be a European model economy for renewables. I mean, the possibilities are limitless. Help us understand your thinking.
Thank you very much. Regarding rebuilding of the occupied territories last year, since the beginning of this year, we are focusing only on providing basic services on these regions. First of all, we're trying to restore transport connectivity just of these regions with the rest part of Ukraine, and at least some minor basic services, social services. First of all, healthcare, some education services. This is our priority at this stage. And recently we started providing financial support for our people, who received, whose apartments, houses received some minor damages during this war. This is, at this stage, I mean, this is probably the most critical. Almost all projects we are implementing with support of IFIs, and this is our priority. In terms of rebuilding and more long-term vision, I think it's important to say that I hope that very soon we will start accession process to EU membership. And I think those two projects, if we're talking about modernized Ukraine and new country, new economy, will be combined with accession process. I mean, it will take investment. I mean, it will cover all aspects. First of all, reforms, and as a result of reforms, investments. And again, for us, it's absolutely clear that in this part of Europe, we will definitely have new economy, because we know that a lot of companies, producers, investors, they won't be presented anymore in Russia, but they require production facilities in this part of Europe. And for us, it's definitely opportunity. For us, we definitely have to use this opportunity to provide required conditions, guarantees for the investors. Again, we will talk in more details. We'll present those plans during London conference. Definitely, energy sector will be the key element of new economy, of new Ukraine, because first of all, many of our very old and very inefficient power generation stations were destroyed last year, and definitely we will focus on new projects, on new decentralized model of energy system, which will be more reliable, more green, and it will require huge investments from private sector. But again, in order to receive these investments, we understand that we need to finish our homework. In parallel, if it will happen in parallel with accession process, with required reforms, which already some of them, many of them, I would say, were implemented last year and this year, I think we will succeed.
Deputy Prime Minister, the one question I do hear often is, do you have sufficient absorptive capacity and human capital to be able to implement these massive projects. I mean, it's on a scale that it's hard for me to understand, and understanding where 10 million Ukrainians are outside Ukraine, IDPs. Are you worried about absorptive capacity to be able to fully implement this restoration program?
Definitely, even now with just very small volumes of restorations, we are facing with some problems. First of all, yes, you're absolutely right, it's human capital, because like millions of Ukrainians support our army. Thousands of people, hundreds of thousands, they serve to our army, and that's definitely or in reserve already. They drafted, so it's problem number one. Second, it's logistic problem, and third, it's definitely building materials. A lot of productions were destroyed in first region during first year of the war, so it will have problem. For example, all steel for bridges in previous year were produced in Mariupol and Azovstal. Now we understand that it's not available for us. But anyway, I mean, all those challenges we will overcome.
Senator, building is a shared responsibility. We've just heard from the Deputy Prime Minister how they're preparing the way. How do you envision the U.S. playing a role in Ukraine's reconstruction? We certainly are focused, and we heard earlier this morning, we're focused on providing the military capabilities that Ukraine needs to liberate those occupied territories. But there feels like there's some hesitancy about going to the next step, which is committing the United States with our European partners for this shared building. What do you think needs to be done in Washington to help with a modern Marshall Plan for Ukraine?
Well, again, we are a democracy that things have to be sold, and you have to make sure there's a shared understanding. I actually am confident that we will see the bipartisan support of Reconstruction, and we need to follow some very basic principles and many of the lessons learned from the Marshall Plan. So first and foremost, Ukrainian-led and Ukrainian-centered. It's really important that it is something that the Ukrainians are leading. You heard the Deputy Prime Minister talk about transparency and accountability. That is really critical at a time where nefarious forces thrive on corruption. It's no coincidence that just days before Putin's invasion, he was giving a speech maligning Ukrainian efforts to root out corruption because it undermined the kleptocracy's ability to influence Ukraine. So that's the second principle I would say that's very important, is supporting efforts to make sure that there's a lot of transparency and there's anti-corruption efforts. Another critical principle is private sector has got to be at the center of the effort. And yet, private sector has to have some kind of assurances that help to de-risk the investment of capital. And this idea that we could provide many of the Western nations a fund to help with insurance, for example, is going to be very, very critical to attracting the kind of private capital that's ultimately very necessary. In addition to that, we need to be bold and creative, and that's what excites me about this opportunity. It is an opportunity for Ukraine to be a leader when it comes to certain areas. Creating an energy a model for the future of Europe could happen in Ukraine. In integrating new technologies and new opportunities could be critical in Ukraine. And so I see a lot of possibilities if we can reimagine and dream along with the Ukrainian people about what is possible. And this is the thing I'll end with. I have watched now over the last 2 years the Ukrainian people continually being underestimated by the larger global population. And time again, you have seen Ukraine define one of the principles of this conference, ideas. The last word I saw was hope as I walked in here. And Ukraine has shown what hope is really about. Hope is not the absence of despair. Hope is unflinching, seeing the reality what it is, and not letting despair have the last word. It is tenacious, audacious, persistent, and bold. And I think that should not just be in Ukrainians' defense with the present attacks. I think we need to have that same kind of Ukrainian hopefulness leading us into the reimagination of a better, more secure future for Ukraine and for our transatlantic alliance.
I'm so glad you mentioned the role of the private sector. That will be predominantly featured at the London Ukraine Recovery Conference. The Deputy Prime Minister mentioned that. And in fact, the original Marshall Plan was led, Paul Hoffman was the former CEO of Studebaker, one of the great industrial of the age at the time. Does the United States need a new Paul Hoffman to lead this effort, sir?
Well, again, I would like to see the ideas of recovery become more centralized now. I'm one of these folks that thinks we need someone like a special envoy who is rallying sort of America's cross-sector efforts to support the Ukrainian recovery. I think this is so important that we create with Ukraine and rules for the road to see the war end and other forces move in, whether it's the PRC or others, to try to undermine the progress that the Ukrainian people made concerns me. And so as a person who believes in free markets, who believes in the power of the private sector, I definitely think there needs to be leaders emerging that can help us to create that kind of growth that we've seen again from Germany to Japan. After World War II, we've seen private sector leadership, global leadership really rise.
Fantastic. Deputy Prime Minister, you're going to have the absolute last word. And again, thank you so much for being with us. So next month, June 21st, the London conference, in a sentence or two, what will be success in your eyes after that conference? What do you want to accomplish at the Ukraine Recovery Conference?
I think, I hope that projects which will be presented during this conference, again, we are working on many of them with our colleagues from different ministries. They will be focused on involvement of private sector. It will be mostly PPP projects. Our success, I think, at this stage, because the war is continuing, at least just to structure a very few number of projects. It doesn't matter like the scale of those projects. Finally, just we receive some mechanisms which allow us to implement those projects to have war insurance during this, even during the war, from DFC, from MIGA, its World Bank structure, to implement those projects to show that even during the war we can do this. Investors, they are receiving, in case if we eliminate war risks, they will see that other conditions, they are acceptable. And again, it will be the very important sign for future investments, because in case if we are capable to realize such project during the war, I think it will prove that after the war, during the reconstruction recovery process, like we were open, predictable, and provide all required guarantees for investors.
Mr. Deputy Prime Minister, thank you. I think to sum it up, let's start building. Senator Booker, thank you so much for being with us. Deputy Prime Minister, thank you so much. Please, with your warm applause.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister.
Thank you.